Hi everyone, and welcome to our short training session on carbon monoxide. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kate Irwin. I run an organisation called Yorkshire Energy Doctor, which is a community interest company based in the Selby district of North Yorkshire. We work to tackle fuel poverty. So to all of those who are watching who have been on one of our community energy ambassador courses, hello again. And I'm afraid there's no Chris today, there's only me, but hopefully that's okay with everybody. For those of you who haven't yet been on one of our courses, you'd be very welcome, and we have some dates booked into the diary in the next few months. So we're funded by Northern Gas Networks, and one of their priorities and one of our priorities is raising awareness of carbon monoxide, which is what we want to do today. So I hope that you'll find it useful. Before I start properly, I just want you to have a little think about how you would currently rate your knowledge of carbon monoxide. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, I just want you to make a note of how you would rate your knowledge. Lovely. Okay, we'll come back to that later. So the next thing we're going to do before I properly crack on with what I want to say, I'd actually like you to pause this video and visit this website, which is projectshout.com. And on that website, there's a number of real life video case studies where people who have actually had their lives or their families' lives affected by carbon monoxide, they share their stories. So I'd like you just to pause this, pop onto that website and just watch 1 or 2 of those videos, and then we'll reconvene. Fab. Okay, hopefully you've been on that website and you've come back. I mean, I don't know which ones you've watched, but there's some powerful stories on there. I know one lady in particular, Stacey Rogers, who it was such a tragic story with what happened to her son. But since then, she's just done an absolutely amazing job of raising awareness of the risks of carbon monoxide. So anything that we all can do to sort of back that up as well, I just think is really important. So we're going to start then by thinking about exactly what carbon monoxide is. So it's a gas. It's produced when fuel doesn't burn properly. So usually fuel burns, if there's plenty of oxygen, you'll get carbon dioxide, so CO2 produced, which is present generally in the atmosphere. If there isn't enough oxygen, carbon monoxide will be produced, and that's a completely different ballgame. So carbon monoxide is known as a silent killer. You can't see it, you can't taste it, you can't smell it, you have no way of knowing it's there unless you have some kind of alarm. And it's a horrible gas. It gets into your bloodstream, it prevents the blood cells from carrying oxygen around your body and can have some quite devastating consequences. So to give you a few facts and figures, every year in this country, about 4,000 people go to A&E with suspected carbon monoxide poisoning. About 200 people are hospitalised, and very sadly 50 people die. Now 50 people for something that is preventable and avoidable, it's just terrible. I mean, imagine if it was someone in your family or one of your friends who died from this, when there are things we can do to minimise those risks and prevent it happening. So we're all at risk of carbon monoxide, but there are certain groups that are more at risk than others. And those groups are young children, pregnant women, people with underlying heart or respiratory problems, and elderly people. Okay, so just to break that up, I've got a question for you. So do you think this statement is a myth or a fact? It's a bit of a quiz, but I don't know what you're thinking or what your answer is. So it's really not a test. So if I said to you, carbon monoxide poisoning can be very difficult to diagnose, would you think that's a myth or do you think it's a fact? Okay, had to think about it. So it is in fact a fact. The symptoms of carbon monoxide are very similar to things that we just get all the time and don't really think too much of. So things like flu, sort of getting a bit of a headache, feeling a bit sick, feeling tired. At low levels of carbon monoxide, those are the types of symptoms you might experience. So there is a tendency when you think of carbon monoxide to think of it being really dangerous and it's going to kill you, which at very, very high levels it can, as it sadly did with Stacey Rogers' son. But at those lower levels, some of these symptoms, they can be very, very easily confused with other things. At the higher levels, then yes, it can lead to death, it can lead to unconsciousness, it can have some very severe excuse me, consequences. So I'd really urge you to be aware of some of these symptoms. And I think in terms of how to distinguish them between other things, are they worse when you're in the house? So do you go out or go to work or go shopping and do you suddenly feel a lot better? That is obviously a sign that there's something going on inside the house. Are other people in your house experiencing other similar symptoms, including your pets? And are the symptoms fairly seasonal? So do they actually get worse in the winter when we've got our heating on a bit more and you're potentially more at risk? So just bear in mind those different symptoms of carbon monoxide. Because of the difficulty in diagnosing it, medical professionals do actually expect those figures that I gave you earlier to be underestimated, and that more people actually are exposed to this than is registered. Okay, so my next statement for you, is this one a myth or a fact? So carbon monoxide can only be produced from a gas boiler. Do you think that's a myth or do you think that's a fact? So if you said it was a myth, then you would be correct. There are a number of different potential sources of carbon monoxide. So you can see some of the pictures there. There are boilers, there's some gas hobs, gas wall heaters. I think the first thing to say, and I do think this is quite a common myth, partly because when I was speaking to a woman over the winter and she said, oh, I don't have a carbon monoxide alarm anymore. I moved house, I used to have gas, but now I've got oil, so I don't need it anymore. So if you are chatting to people about this, please do make people aware that it's not just gas appliances that produce carbon monoxide. If someone's got an oil boiler, if they've got bottled gas, or if they've got LPG tank, those sort of appliances could potentially produce carbon monoxide. Open fireplaces that might burn coal or wood. It's quite interesting, that picture in the bottom right. There was a story about 3 years ago down in the southwest where the fire service was called to someone's house because their carbon monoxide alarm was going off, and they visited them, and what they found was that carbon monoxide was actually being produced by a bucket of ashes. So the people in the house had emptied out the fireplace, put all the ashes in a bucket, but hadn't taken the bucket outside. And the levels of carbon monoxide being produced were about 400 parts per million, which, if you go back to the previous slide, fits within that nearly the medium level of exposure. So there was a lot being produced. So it's not, as I say, it's not just gas appliances. There's also a picture on there of a barbecue, and there have been cases where people have been camping, they've got a disposable barbecue or sort of another small portable barbecue, they've gone to bed in the tent, they've pulled the barbecue inside before going to sleep, shut the door, and people have died from carbon monoxide poisoning while being in a tent. And Northern Gas Networks do quite a lot of work, well, back in the day when things like festivals used to happen, of trying to promote the risks to people at festivals and people camping. So there are other sources as well that aren't on there, things like sort of generators, potentially sort of car exhausts, sort of petrol lawnmowers, all those sorts of things. If the fuel doesn't burn right, then it could potentially produce carbon monoxide. So how is it produced? I mean, the reasons, I guess, are if appliances, they're not properly installed, they're poorly maintained, and there's poor ventilation. It could include things like blocking flues or chimneys, burning fuel in enclosed or unventilated spaces, or even faulty or blocked car exhausts. So what can we do to minimise the risk of carbon monoxide for ourselves, for our friends, for our family, and potentially with the people that we support? before I go on to that, I've got another question for you. So is this a myth or a fact? Is it illegal? Do you feel that it's a legal requirement for landlords to fit carbon monoxide alarms? Is that a myth or is that a fact? So it is in fact a myth. It is not a legal requirement in all cases for landlords to fit carbon monoxide alarms. So there are one or two specific requirements. So if someone's in a house where there's an appliance that burns or is capable of burning solid fuel, then it is a legal requirement that a landlord fits a carbon monoxide alarm. So that could be if you've got an open fireplace, a log burner, or potentially like a back boiler that burns coal, then landlords do have to have a CO alarm. But if you've got gas or you've got oil, then it's best practice only, which is a bit of a missed opportunity. There is actually a government consultation going on that closed in November last year, and they are proposing to change this. So, and requiring private and social landlords to install CO alarms. But at the moment, that's not a legal requirement. So in terms of getting a carbon monoxide alarm, they cost around £10–15. And it needs to be audible. So a few years ago, we were doing a project with some children's centres in Bradford, and they said they had a whole stash of these like spot detectors. And what those do, the ones on the left, if it detects carbon monoxide, that spot changes colour. But as I'm sure you can appreciate, it's not going to wake you up in the middle of the night. It's probably going to get lost under newspapers. It's just pointless having one of those. You really need to have one of these alarms like this one shown on the right. It needs to be compliant to British standards, carry a kite mark, and that will wake you up or alert you as soon as it detects carbon monoxide. A couple of other pointers with that is that these carbon monoxide detectors do actually have expiry dates. They last about 7 to 10 years. So if you've got one in your house, go and check the expiry date. Or if you're chatting to anyone about it, just make people aware that they do expire, just because the sensor loses its kind of sensitivity over time. The other thing, as with smoke alarms, test it, check that it works. There's no point having any of these things if they don't work. The next thing we can do is make sure all our appliances are properly maintained. So getting boilers serviced and annually by a gas safe engineer, or with solid fuel through HETAS, or if you've got an oil system, an engineer that's registered with Offtech. So don't get anybody, a neighbour or a friend, just to come and fit. It's just not worth messing around with these things. If you're supporting households where there's potentially a child under 5, or a pensioner, or someone who's disabled or chronically sick, they would be eligible for the Priority Services Register with their energy company. And for some of the big companies, they actually offer free gas safety checks for any households on that register. So it might be worth checking with that to see if people can be on that register and whether they're actually entitled to a free gas safety check. It's not a service, but it is a safety check. A few other tips: don't block vents. I know there can be a tendency, particularly in drafty homes, and people will block vents just to stop the cold air coming in, but those vents are there for a reason. So I'd really encourage people not to block vents in their homes. Again, people struggling a bit with their heating or getting money on their meter for the winter, try and encourage people not to use gas rings or ovens for heating. They might quickly flick that on, thinking that it will be cheaper than central heating, but those sort of things are not designed to be used for heating, so don't do it. Get chimneys swept, make sure they're nice and clear to ensure maximum sort of flow of oxygen, and don't burn things like charcoal or start your lawnmower up or anything like that in an enclosed space. So the next thing, be aware of some of the signs. So it might be if you've got a gas cooker, are the flames on the hob, do they burn slightly orange or yellow, and potentially slightly floppy rather than a crisp blue flame? Pilot light, does that frequently blow out on a boiler? You could potentially get increased condensation on windows. and also potentially sooty or yellow-brown staining on or around an appliance. So just be aware of some of those signs. And then what to do if you suspect carbon monoxide poisoning. So turn off gas appliances or any appliance immediately, open the doors and windows and leave the property. You can see your doctor or go to hospital. They can run a test to see whether you have got carbon monoxide in your system. And you can call the National Gas Emergency Service on that phone number. They'll send someone out to check. If you've got an oil system, there's a different number for OFTEC. Again, if you've got solid fuel, there's a different number for HETAS. And you really need to get a registered engineer with one of these recognised bodies to come out and check any appliance before you turn things back on and go back in. So that's what I want to tell you about carbon monoxide. So what could you do now based on what I've told you? You could tell some of your colleagues about this training, encourage them to learn about carbon monoxide as well. You could buy a carbon monoxide alarm. I had meant to say actually earlier that some people think that the fire service often can fit these at the same time as doing smoke alarms, but that's not the case. Quite often they don't have any funding for carbon monoxide alarms, and it's really hard to get them for free. So you do tend to have to buy them. But if you want to have a chat with me about where to get them from, then please do. You could raise awareness of the risks of carbon monoxide amongst your friends and family, tell them about the importance of having an alarm and see whether they have got one or not. If you work on a one-to-one basis with clients, then could you integrate a question into any checklist just to ask people if they're aware of the risks and symptoms of carbon monoxide? Do they have an alarm? Do they get their boiler serviced? Just some questions you could run with them. We could all share information on social media, potentially in newsletters, or even organise some sort of engagement event for your clients. And if you feel there's any way we could help with these, like do a talk or provide you with information to be shared, then please let me know, because I'm more than happy to do that. So finally, the last thing, I'd really appreciate it if you could complete this short online survey, please. We have to provide evidence to our funders, Northern Gas Networks, just to say, yep, this is who we've spoken to, and this is how the level of knowledge has changed. So I asked you at the beginning to rate your knowledge at 1 out of 10. This form will ask you to do it again now and share those figures. So hopefully your level of knowledge has increased as a result of watching this video. These surveys are anonymous. It just asks a few questions about what you might do on the back of this information. But as I say, please, if you can fill that in. And also use our partner codes, because this then tells Northern Gas Networks that we have provided you with this information. If you're up with all the latest technology, then if you scan this QR code on your phone, then that will take you straight to the survey on your phone, and you can obviously fill it in on there and fill in the forms, the codes while you've got this up on your computer screen. Any problems with that, please let me know. And that's it. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in any other training opportunities or have any questions about carbon monoxide, or just want to look at ways to raise awareness, please get in touch with me. Those are my contact details, and I'd be very happy to have a chat with you, as always, about any of this or anything to do with energy. Thanks again, and hope to catch up with you soon. Bye.